you joined us, we were bragging on you a little bit. So we might share some of that, but we're afraid that the size of our screen might not be big enough if we really inflate your ego with the pride that we have that you represent us in Richmond. I was sharing with Krysta and Nick when I first became an attorney. I came to Loudoun in the early 90s. I heard of Mark Herring, but I didn't know who the heck Mark Herring was, and then you would hear the stories and then the positions and responsibilities that you took. One bit of the pride that I had in you was the fact that you always remained literally as the regular man. I don't want to use the word common man because that's not appropriate, but just really the regular person. You're walking up and down the street. Even now, there are no airs about you. It really is. You're very community centric. So that is something that I take from you, the humility that you have and your humbleness. And I take pride that I can say that you're one of ours. And you're doing some awesome things down in Richmond. So we're going to pepper you with some questions. You can plead the fifth at any point in time that you want to. But we're just going to ask you some questions, and you're welcome to ask us some questions. We're just here to have a dialogue and share with our community, one of our own.
Sure. Well, I'm really grateful to have the opportunity. And first of all, and not knowing exactly who all will be the listeners and viewers, in the belief that most of them, if not all of them, are Loudoners. First of all, let me give a big shout out to everybody and our fellow Loudoners. I'm sure, like all of us, we miss being able to get together in person, but we will do that soon when it is safe. In the meantime, it's really nice that we have opportunities like this to stay connected and also to stay informed. So Buta, thanks for arranging for it. And thanks for inviting me and letting me have the opportunity to have this conversation.
Well, it's a pleasure having you. So you were speaking quite extensively a little while ago about your faith. So I know you may know Rajesh Goody, and he's a member of our community. So Rajesh asked me if I could ask you this question, which was, how can we better engage interfaith and community leadership to further all-around holistic well-being at local communities? So you just kind of set us up very nicely when you were speaking about your faith, and I would love for him to have that response from you.
Yeah. Well, I think we in Loudoun really do have a strong interfaith community, and I think it's something that we can feel really good about. One of the concerns that I've had, and I've been raising the alarm for a number of years about this, is the rise in hate and bigotry and white supremacist extremism that we've seen. And I started noticing it, I think it was back in 2015, even before the 2016 election. I noticed anti-Hindu graffiti that was spray painted on some overpasses in our own county in Loudoun. There were, and shortly thereafter, we heard examples of Jewish schools and community centers and synagogues being the target of vandalism and threats. Some of our mosques were vandalized. In Ashburn, there was a historic African-American schoolhouse that had racial epithets spray painted on it. But one of the things, while that's very disturbing, and we have to call it out, and we have to pair those words with actions, and we can talk a little bit about that. But getting back to the faith community in Loudoun, I thought the response that we saw in Loudoun and really elsewhere in Northern Virginia and throughout the state was really heartwarming. If one particular faith community had been singled out, all faith communities came together in support. I think about when the African-American schoolhouse in Ashburn had racial graffiti spray painted on it. It generated a community-wide response, not just to speak out against it, not just to come together, but then to raise money to renovate the schoolhouse and as a part of our cultural history. And so while the continuation of the spread of hate and bigotry and white supremacists has to be a real concern for people, especially following what we saw in Charlottesville in August of 2017, and then more recently in the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. And people cannot ignore the racial aspects and the white supremacy that seemed to tie so many of those who attacked the Capitol. So those are huge concerns, but at the same time, I do draw strength from the engagement of the faith communities and people coming together in response to that.
So go ahead, Buta.
No, you're good.
So I'm just curious, just one more question on faith. A lot of times people who are almost on the quote unquote opposite side of things that you are passionate about use faith as an excuse or reason why they believe what they believe. How do you reconcile that, being such a person of faith?
Well, I read, people have different points of view, different faith traditions, but there are some commonalities. We can have some disagreements in, our approach to things, and sometimes it leads to different positions as we live out our faith. But it doesn't mean that we should discount someone else's faith. It doesn't mean that we should, we should treat each other with respect and their opinions with respect. But then there are some, I think, outer guardrails where we all have to be careful in society that don't get crossed. And, anti-Semitism has no place in this country. The kind of white supremacists that we've seen in Charlottesville, neo-Nazis, neo-Confederates, white nationalists, they don't share basic democratic values. And so to me, if they choose to base that in their faith, that's for them to sort through. But if they live that out in the way that we saw in Charlottesville, no, there were not good people on both sides. There were white supremacists and neo-Nazis, and they're wrong. And so we do have to make sure that those guardrails in our democracy are recognized.
Right. And I know you travel throughout Virginia, so I can't speak to your experience in that regard, but I do have a very warm place in my heart when I see the interfaith community in Loudoun County, because we have the Adams Center, which is one of the largest mosques in the area. Then we have, the temples, and we have the synagogues, and we have, the Hindu and the Sikhs. And as you said, when we have a challenging time, boy, do they rally together around one another. And it's none of this, oh, that's your problem, it's not my problem. It is our problem. And I love that representation of our community when they're able to do that, because I think it just gives us some assurance that we are safe with one another. And you can dismiss those who may not see it the same way, and that's fine. As you said, you can live your life, but do not negatively impact us, because we are going to band together for the security and safety of our community. So that really has been wonderful to see in Loudoun County. And I don't know if a lot of the different communities will have that same experience, but that is definitely something that we brag about here in Loudoun. So that's very cool to be able to see that. I'm going to segue a little bit to the General Assembly right now is in session. And they've touched upon a lot of things that that we did not think would be possible in Virginia. So when we start looking at, I'm going to go a little bit to the different voting rights and the voter suppression issues that they dealt with, and trying to ensure that everyone has the right to vote and the ability to vote last year. And I know your office wanted to make sure that whoever, obviously they had to be appropriate and eligible to vote, but whoever was going to vote, that they could vote. And again, we don't suggest that you have to vote one way or another, but that was awesome to see. Can you share with us your experience as far as last year, the challenges that you had to be able to ensure that Virginians got to maintain and would be able to vote as they wished?
Sure, we put a lot of effort into making sure that Virginia's elections were safe, secure, accurate, free, and fair. And that work actually started in the springtime. Once the pandemic hit, in the beginning, I think we were all a little unsure how long this was going to go. But after a couple months, I could see that it's going to be with us for a while, and the pandemic was going to create some challenges for people to be able to vote safely. So one of the things we did leading into the June primaries was get an agreement that was approved by a federal court to make sure that people who felt that if they wanted to vote by mail absentee, that if they thought that it would jeopardize their health to find someone else to witness their ballot signature, that they would not have to have a witness. Nobody should have to jeopardize their health in order to be able to vote. And that worked really well. And so we also got that agreement in place for the elections in the fall. But there were a lot of other challenges that came along with it as well. It started for me, one of them was the continued misinformation from our former president, Donald Trump, trying to discredit the electoral system early on in the summer. And so I wanted to try to counter that message. As someone who has been involved in elections for decades, and Buta, I'm sure you have seen it as well, the elections officials at polling places and in the registrar's office, they are very civic minded, and they take making sure that elections are held fairly, very, very seriously. In a lot of ways, it's a mission and a calling for them. And so I wanted to make sure that we countered that message with no, in Virginia, and I believed elsewhere, elections were going to be fair and we could have confidence in our electoral system. But beyond messaging, when I heard the president attacking states who wanted to try to expand vote by mail, to discourage mail or cast doubt on that system, then we started countering that message too, making sure that people could have confidence in their electoral system. And then when I saw that he was weaponizing the Postal Service, trying to potentially disrupt the delivery of ballots, then I took him to court. And we were successful in getting an injunction to roll back changes like removing large mail sorting equipment from distribution centers and other policy changes that really had an impact on the postal system's ability to do its work. And then we had some unexpected challenges. So on the last day of voter registration, a contractor cut through a fiber optic line that caused state servers to go down, and people could not register online to vote. And so we quickly went into court and got a 2-day extension, and thousands of Virginians were able to register afterward as a result, because they weren't able to register online on the last day. And then, we saw potential threats and harassment. There was a group of people who showed up on the first day of early voting outside of Fairfax County Government Center in conduct that, could potentially have been voter intimidation. And I wanted to make sure that all Virginians knew that there are state and federal laws that prohibit that, and that elections officials have tools if they need them to make sure that it doesn't happen. We put training videos together for local law enforcement and elections officials so that they knew what those tools were and how to use them if they needed them. And thankfully, that didn't materialize. But a lot of work went into making sure those elections were fair, to make sure that every Virginian who was eligible and qualified to vote could do so safely. And we succeeded at that. And I think we all in Virginia can take pride in that.
And that is huge, because I think that is, at the end of the day, what we always want to do is to encourage people to become engaged. Now, I'm not going to ask anybody for their age except for Nick, because, he is the one, and his group and those younger than he are the reason why we do this. Everything we do really is for our next generation, so that they feel like they can come up and be engaged in our communities. And if we don't have that safety and security in the elections, then they do. They're left with feeling like, why would I engage in something that doesn't make a difference? So Nick, in regards to this past election and just the voting aspect of it, what do you think you and your peers felt would be the message that was received to make you want to be engaged?
I think that that's a great question, Buta. And as someone, who lives in Virginia and who goes to college in Oregon, being able to vote is great to be able to do by mail. And, to see that there are individuals who want to make that more difficult than it already is. I'm already concerned enough about making sure that my vote gets out here, that I can fill it out, that I can get a witness, that I can send it back, on top of all the struggles and roadblocks that we've seen last year and that people want to put in place. And so having someone who stands up for those accesses to just being able to vote, is a huge thing for young people, because it's already a system that, countlessly leaves us out or doesn't include us in the planning in the first place. And so the message I think that we receive when we have people that stand up and that recognize that this access is vital is a good one, and it encourages participation. So I appreciate that.
And Nicholas, when you're at school in Oregon, you have a wonderful Attorney General out there, Ellen Rosenblum. She's fantastic, and I know she is someone who also likes to amplify the voices of young people and make sure that people are encouraged to vote.
Nick, however, I'll challenge your AG with my AG. I think we got the better one, but that just might be my opinion. So that's pretty awesome that we're able to have Mark with us here today. Nick made a comment, Mark, as far as, taking on the challenges of those who may feel disenfranchised. Now, you haven't been shy or hesitant about suing the federal government on a number of different issues. And you did it to represent the rights and the ability for our LGBTQ community to be able to feel like they have value and are valued. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit of, how did you get into that you made that decision that that's what you wanted and were going to do, and then whether or not you were successful?
Yeah, and I have not shied away from taking on big fights and win them. And for me, it gets back to what motivated me to want to do this job in the first place. I had a whole different vision for what an attorney general should be doing than a lot of my predecessors. I believe that the attorney general is the people's lawyer, and that we should be on the side of the people, helping to fight for them, helping to vindicate their rights. And a lot of my predecessors had a very different view. Take, for example, when Barbara Johns led a walkout of her dilapidated, segregated school near Farmville in Prince Edward County. She recognized the unfairness of that at age 15, and it caught the attention of the NAACP Legal Fund and some outstanding lawyers like Oliver Hill and Thurgood Marshall. And the case ultimately was one of the 5 Brown versus Board of Education cases. And her attorney general at the time fought to maintain segregated schools, and fought her all the way to the Supreme Court, and thankfully lost. And then later, the Virginia Attorney General fought to defend the prohibition on interracial marriage, went all the way to the Supreme Court in the landmark Loving versus Virginia case. Even as recently as the 1990s in the VMI case, where the Attorney General at the time fought gender equality in higher education. So I came in with a whole different view of what an Attorney General should be doing, and important landmark cases like that, and in so many other ways. And so when I was first elected in November of 2013, I was sworn in January of 2014, there was already a pending legal challenge to Virginia's ban on marriage for same-sex couples. I looked into it, I looked at the law, and I concluded that if this case were to go to the US Supreme Court, that it would likely be struck down. I thought it was unconstitutional. And of course, that was not the end of the analysis for me. I also had to think about, okay, so what does an attorney general do in this situation? And we found precedent for an attorney general saying, no, if the law is unconstitutional, we don't have to defend that. And so I decided, you know what? We need to go in and fight for marriage equality. We need to fight for Virginians. and make sure that their rights are protected. And we won. It was a huge decision. It was very controversial at the time. People tried to get me disbarred. People tried to impeach me. But I knew that I could draw strength from my fellow Virginians who were so happy to see me stand up and fighting for them. And I had Virginians from all over call me and tell me what it meant to them, that their son or their daughter called them in tears, telling them how much it meant to them that their attorney general was standing up fighting for them. I've had people tell me that as a result of what we did, relationships, family relationships that had been severed for decades were reestablished and reconnections were made. And, you know, we talk about lofty ideals and principles like equality, but I never lose sight of how those principles impact people of all walks of life, and how when we get closer to those ideals, we can help make their lives better.
That is awesome. Because when you were talking about as far as other ways that your office can add to the value of families and individuals, we know that there's an opiate crisis. And I know you have taken certain action, but I tell you what, my biggest thing has always been this. These pharmaceuticals knew what the heck they were doing. They knew how addictive their drugs are. And what they were doing is they were creating these, doctors' offices that were literally just, issuing pills as fast as they could, fill a prescription. They were doing it. And it really heartened me to see that you ended up going after them. And that was to want to stop the action, but two, also to get some compensation, because they were crushing us as to how they were impacting our communities, not only in the human loss, but also in the financial impact that it was to our community. So that was something that I was very grateful to see you do. But I would love for you to be able to share with our community as far as what even made you go that route, because that wasn't as common as you would think, or common sense as you would think.
Well, I actually went back to very early in the beginning of my administration in 2014. One of the first things I did was, my background, I got my start in public service as a county supervisor. So, I'm all about local government, local community. And so I thought the first thing I want to do is travel around the state, meet with local officials, local law enforcement, local Commonwealth attorneys, and just listen and hear what they were saying about their most pressing issues that they were facing, and how I could help them and support their work. And I was really stunned by how many of them, and this was in 2014, told me that heroin and opioids were a serious problem and getting worse, and it seemed like nobody was listening. And so, I told my team, let's dig deep and see what's going on. The numbers reflected that it was taking off. And so we started developing a program, but a lot of ways to try to address it. One of the key things, though, that I did was to try to depart from our drug policies that have been failures in the past. I knew this was not something that we could arrest our way out of. Mm-hmm. Certainly there was an element of law enforcement. We wanted to make sure that we strengthen our efforts to go after the dealers and traffickers who are bringing these drugs into Virginia. But we also knew that this was really a public health crisis. We had to really address some communications issues, because I remember traveling around and talking to civic organizations and talking about some of the work we were doing, and I could see on people's faces, like, why is he talking about heroin in 2015? But it took some time to sound the alarm on this, and then also to get people to see that when someone turns to heroin, it very often has its start in the medicine cabinets, where a prescription that was lawfully acquired because of maybe a dental surgery, sports injury, auto accident, but they're so addictive that once the pills are gone, they look for more. When they can't get any more, they turn to heroin. And so that, really is what got me deeply engaged in trying to do everything I can on the prevention and treatment side. But I also knew that because it has its origins in the medicine cabinets, it actually has roots deeper into the boardrooms and marketing offices of the pharmaceutical manufacturers and distributors, because they knew how dangerous these drugs were. And they developed all kinds of marketing schemes and efforts to persuade doctors to prescribe more, and just force as many pills into as many communities as possible. And then we see the catastrophic results of so many tens of thousands of Virginians losing their lives to an opioid addiction, tens of thousands of families having their lives turned upside down. And so a part of our work, in addition to trying to expand treatment and do prevention, is also to hold those who are responsible accountable for their actions. And so we have been investigating the pharmaceutical companies who manufacture opioids, the distributors, and it's been an ongoing work. Companies like Purdue Pharma, we sued Purdue, we sued some members of the Sackler family individually because they were, on boards or positions of authority making those decisions, and took billions and billions of dollars out. Now they've sought protection in the bankruptcy courts, and we're working through that. We've also been investigating other companies. We've filed suit against Teva, Cephalon, and so some of you may have heard recently we were able to get a $560 million settlement with one of the marketing consultants to Purdue Pharma. And that was just recently announced, and Virginia should get $13.6 million of that. And what I want to see is that money go directly back into communities in Virginia to support addiction treatment and other services, and get the money where it's needed to help those who are hurting. And I'm hopeful that other money that we get from either court judgments or settlements then go into this abatement program to really truly help people who are battling addiction and need treatment.
You said earlier that and you understand that we can't arrest ourselves out of the crisis that we have regarding the drug addictions. And just by way of anecdote, I remember years ago, before we knew what Oxycontin was, right? In the courts, having seen a person who was going before the court, because what he was doing is he was robbing the CVS's, literally jumping the counters and swooping in and, snatching whatever he could, number of bottles to be able to do that. So when he's before the court and he's allocuting, which means he's making a statement to the judge before the judge imposes a sentence, and he explains to the judge that he would steal those bottles, and they might have 50 or 100 pills, which they were supposed to be like 24-hour pills, like one per day. And he would crush 20 at a time just to keep his mind from thinking that he was going to be in an extreme amount of pain. So, a lot of times when we think about drugs, we think, oh, it's a high, that somebody's being made to feel, like either glorious or euphoric. It wasn't. It was to alleviate his mind from that pending pain that he thought he was going to feel. And he told the story that he was a construction worker. He fell off a roof, went to the doctor, and the doctor's like, here, take these pills and you're going to be fine. And over the course of time, came to learn that within 7 days, you could be addicted to Oxycontin. 7 days. Who thinks, what normal person thinks that would be a problem or concern? And it wasn't. The pharmaceuticals knew about that. So we appreciate the efforts that you and your office have undertaken to be able to say, one is, we know you did wrong, but you intentionally did wrong, and there's going to be some accountability. And then using whatever we could recoup.
And I wanted to add something else that I feel so strongly about. You mentioned the word elocution. And when someone is charged with a criminal matter and they plead guilty, they go before the court and in front of the judge and say what they did. These are civil matters. Those are the tools that I have available. And when you have a civil settlement, there's usually language in the agreement that the person who's paying money says, this is not an admission of any wrongdoing. It's just a compromise of a disputed matter. And so, I really felt there should be some admission of what they did, but that's how civil settlements go. So one thing that I have felt very, very strongly about, and I think that, and we've gotten it in the case that I just talked about, but a commitment to bring all of the documents, all of the internal documentation within the company, and put it in a public repository in perpetuity so everybody can see. So historians, journalists, even somebody who's lost a loved one, if they want to look at it and see, and make up their own minds, who's responsible for this, all of that information will be out there, because we're not going to get that kind of admission of guilt or elocution. And I felt so strongly about that that's something I've been insisting on. And I feel I owe it to everyone who has lost a loved one to this addiction or who's battled an addiction to make sure that the public has access to all of those internal documents, so the whole world will be able to see and judge for themselves who's responsible.
No, that's awesome, because that's awesome accountability and some sort of feeling of validation for individuals who got caught up in that. Because again, when we as a community who are not familiar with the courts will look at that person and see as there's some sort of defect in them, there's something wrong with them, or there's something less than. And a lot of times, literally, these people were, our family members, that they weren't.
And I am pleased to see the shift in public understanding about this. And this was something that we really had to work hard to address, the stigma of addiction. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways that I felt we were successful in getting that message across was just by talking to, and for me personally, getting to know those in the recovery community, talking to people who had lost a son or a daughter or a brother or a sister. How did it start? And as you said, very often it could be an auto accident, it could be a dental surgery, a sports injury, where these pills were legitimately prescribed, but they're so addictive that very quickly the patient develops an addiction, and then once more, and then they're hooked. And it can happen so very quickly, and it can happen to anyone. Right. It can happen to any one of us. And so once we were able to communicate those stories, that's when I really felt that there was a shift in public understanding of addiction, particularly with opioids.
Yeah, I think once our lens changes from looking at it as just here's a criminal or, some other person, we look at it as you indicated earlier, where it's a health crisis, then we as a community can look to support how we're going to get out of that crisis. And I know you're familiar with our local courts where we have a drug court, and the amount of money that we save rather than locking somebody up for a number of years and bringing them back and nothing changes, to saying in the moment what we're going to try and do is provide the support system so that we can get you out of this addiction. Because the investment and the return on the investment is when we then bring you back in the community and you're healthy. You have a job, you're maintaining your family, you've got housing, you're contributing to our tax base. That is a huge win-win, and you're healthy. So that's a great lens change.
So I'm glad to hear that Loudoun's Drug Court is back in operation. We had one, and then for a while we didn't. And I'm a believer that they work, and alternative sentencing and programs like that are really important, particularly in addiction.
Yeah, and we're fortunate because we have a board of supervisors. Chair Randall is from the mental health community, so I think she was a big proponent of that. Then our circuit court judges have been very supportive of it, and then obviously all of the other stakeholders have come in and invested their time and energy. And we're actually about to try to double the drug court population from 25 to 50. We're just trying to work on that growing in the economies of scale. But it is very exciting, and you're right. The change in the approach as to how we're dealing with alternative dispositions is the investment. We just can't keep incarcerating people endlessly to think that is a solution. Because as a Commonwealth's attorney, if I could lock you up and you never commit a crime, I might think about that. But we know that doesn't work. So we just got to figure out is how to change the lenses to keeping our community safe.
It's important for all of your viewers to know that won't happen without a supportive Commonwealth's attorney. So thank you, Buta.
No, thank you very much. Now, you talked about stigma before. In addition to the stigma to the those who are drug involved or drug addicted, we also have a stigma still in 2021 with mental health. And right now, Nick and Krysta and I were talking about COVID and the impact of COVID on our community. Now, there is obviously, we have it's a pandemic and it's literally killing people. One of the concerns I actually have is maybe the bigger negative impact is going to be the mental health impact to our communities, because this is so unnatural to us, from the kids to the grandparents who just do not have the day-to-day contact. And I was wondering, from your position as the Attorney General, what have you or your office thought about as to how do we address some of that ability for us to be able to address the mental health aspect, and how do we provide support systems to our communities?
Well, when the pandemic first hit, and really all the way through, one of the things that I've tried to do is reach out to our service provider partners who work with those who have been especially impacted by the pandemic, who we work with, on a regular basis in various capacities. So, for example, part of that is the mental health community, and set out and worked to communicate with as many people as we could to try to stay connected with their supports, even if it's online. Same in the domestic violence community. We encourage people to remain home, either in quarantine or just not to go out, or in lockdown. But there are some for whom home is not a safe place. And so we needed to work especially hard with our domestic violence support groups around the state and in different communities. So it does touch different people in different ways, whether it is addiction service, mental health, domestic violence. In all these areas, the pandemic has really compounded the difficulties that they encounter on an everyday basis.
Yeah, you spoke very appropriately regarding our domestic violence, because you think your home is your haven, and a lot of people are not fortunate enough to have that. So I know Krysta works with a lot of different groups that deal with domestic violence, and trying to make sure that families are safe as being part of a family situation. So I'm going to open the floor for Krysta and Nick to ask some questions, because I know I've been hogging up all your time, and it's definitely the lawyer geek in me that does that. But I did promise them that I would share you, so I'm going to go ahead and do that.
Well, to be honest, Attorney General Herring, when you mentioned Barbara Johns and some of the other historic cases, and we were actually talking about this before you came on, just how you've been at the intersection historically of so many, because of what's going on in society and the great work that you've done. I think that we'll look back on this time in Virginia history as seeing us really being able to just propel forward. And I was just curious, how does that feel? How does it feel to, and you may not see it now, it may take a few years, but how does it feel to kind of be there?
I don't really look at it in that way. The way I look at it is what drove me to want to do this job in the first place. And to be able to use the skills I have as a lawyer, to use the law and think about the creative ways I can use the law to help people. That's what I've been about from the very beginning. And so that's, what got me to see a path to go in and fight for marriage equality. That's what pushed me to see, hey, we can help dreamers get an equal education right here in their home state. We need to fight for Governor McAuliffe's restoration of rights, because if you're going to successfully re-enter society after a conviction, you need to feel like you have a stake in it and be able to vote. It's what made me want to fight Trump's Muslim ban, because I could see how horribly un-American that was, and how hurtful it would be to a Muslim in Virginia, and really any religious or racial or ethnic minority. And so that's really, to me, what it's about. how I can do the most good for others, how I can help people, and to be able to use the training I have as a lawyer and my life experience to try to drive that change. And it's not change for change's sake. It's not trying to just get to a certain ideal. It is really truly about helping Virginians, helping to make their lives better, using the law as a tool. One of the things that for me really illustrates my approach to it, I feel like everybody probably at some point in their lives need the law to help protect them in some way. Growing up, I was raised by a single mom. Some of you may have heard this story, but she grew up in she became a flight attendant. At the time, they were known as stewardesses in the early 1950s. She flew for American Airlines, and when she got engaged, they had a no marriage rule. And she loved that job. She loved it. But because of the no marriage rule, she was forced to quit. And, I heard her, as I was growing up, tell that story and just feel like it was so wrong to really be treated in that way. And to me, that's why I think it's always important for there to be somebody who you can count on to fight for you. And if there's one person, it should be the Attorney General. And I want all Virginians to know that no matter what you look like, where you come from, how you worship, or whom you love, as Attorney General, I will stand up and fight for you and for your rights. And that experience just tells me that there are always people who will need the arm and shield of the law to help and protect them, especially people who are marginalized, people who are discriminated against, people who really need that extra legal support. And that is the vision that I have brought to this job, and I have instilled that mission to everybody in the office. And just a quick little anecdote about how things have changed. I mentioned you brought up Barbara Johns again, and I am so honored that our building in Richmond, the Attorney General's office, is now named in honor of Barbara Johns. And to think where the Attorney General, when she was taking her case to the Supreme Court, was fighting her every single step of the way, now the building in which the Office of Attorney General is housed is named in her honor. And it is a reminder to all of us, to me and everybody who walks through that building, through the doors of that building, that we should follow the lead, the legacy of Barbara Johns. And when we see an injustice, not to turn away, but to fight to make it right.
That's awesome. That's a great segue to this, because this year you ended up expanding, not that you didn't have enough to do in the Attorney General's office, but you decided you want to add at least another component, which is with the Civil Rights Division. What is your vision for that responsibility as to how you and your office are going to be able to use that for the betterment of our communities?
Well, this is really the culmination of a years-long effort. I created the Office of Civil Rights to enhance and centralize our ongoing work to protect Virginians from discrimination and to secure and expand the rights of all Virginians. As I said, I want everyone to know that as Attorney General, I will have their back to fight for their rights. And this has really been a part of my administration. And I mentioned not just the marriage equality, but getting Dreamers an equal education, defending the restoration of voting rights, fighting the Muslim ban, getting new laws to better protect Virginians from hate crimes and white supremacy. The first ever investigation into allegations of racial discrimination in a Virginia school division. So civil rights and the protection of civil rights has always been a cornerstone of my administration. And what the Office of Civil Rights will do is centralize that work and really expand the work that we've already begun in a whole lot of different areas. I can walk through that and kind of give illustrations of how it can benefit really so many people all over the state, including here in Loudoun County. So, if someone, for example, is denied an apartment that they're trying to rent because of their race, they can file a complaint. And in that situation, it would typically go to the Fair Housing Board, and we would work with the Fair Housing Board to take a look into it, and we would take every case seriously. And if it's founded, to try to find a way to right that wrong or enable them to vindicate their rights. Or in employment discrimination. If you are passed over for a raise or a promotion because of sexual orientation, then you can file a complaint either with us or the EEOC. We work closely together, and depending on the size of the company, we would pick it up or the EEOC would, but things like that. And we've recently gotten expansions in the protections for people to make sure they're not discriminated against. So now in places of public accommodation, so let's say if you go into a retail store or you go into a restaurant or a hotel and you're denied service, that is because of religion or race or sexual orientation. That is now prohibited conduct, and we can take action against that. And then we also just recently got authority to do what are called pattern and practice investigations. And in this context, for the Office of Civil Rights, there are really two different kinds. One is, in those examples that I talked about, maybe that's an individual situation and it gets resolved at that level, but it could also be possible that it's pervasive in that particular company, or it's pervasive with that particular apartment manager, or it's pervasive in that particular store. And in that case, as Attorney General, we'll have authority to go in and take a look and try to end that practice from a systemic standpoint. So that's one big chunk of it. And another chunk of it is something that I think is really an important element of criminal justice reform. So it's a pattern and practice investigation into repeated instances of police brutality or unconstitutional policing. And in situations like that, we used to be able to rely on the US Department of Justice to do these. Following the horrific Rodney King beating in Los Angeles, Congress authorized the US Department of Justice to do pattern or practice investigations where there were indications of systemic problems. And they really did a lot of good work over the years, and they could go to court if they needed to enforce it. But under the last administration, under both Attorney General Jeff Sessions and Attorney General Bill Barr, they didn't believe in doing that. And so they stopped doing it. So when the General Assembly met after the George Floyd murder to answer the urgent call for police reform and criminal justice reform, and by the way, the General Assembly did a lot of really positive reforms during that summer. I asked the General Assembly to give our office authority to investigate police departments that repeatedly and systematically have these types of violations, and authorize us to go in, do the investigation, figure out, okay, why is it this is being allowed to happen? What can we do to stop it, and go to court if I need to? Now, thankfully, with the new administration, federally, I think, given how I think the new administration will handle it, we will have a partner to be able to do those jointly in those situations when they come up. That law hasn't started taking effect yet. It will take effect on March 1st. But so those are the things that the Office of Civil Rights does, and it can help people all over the state, including here in Loudoun County. If you've experienced that kind of discrimination, you've got a place to go.
Now, speaking of Loudoun and your discrimination investigation and such, even before you had your civil rights, Office of Civil Rights, you actually worked with the Loudoun chapter of the NAACP in their claim of discrimination against the Loudoun County Public Schools. And your office actually did engage in the investigation and came down with a finding. If you would like to speak to that, I think that definitely just kind of is a great highlight as to not just dealing with, I'll call the big kids, the adult matters, but really to the core of our future, which is our kids and their opportunities for education.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning that. And I'll be able to talk more about it when we're able to get a reconciliation agreement in place with the county. And if we're successful in getting that, then I'll be able to talk a lot more about it. But what I can say is this: when the Loudoun branch of the NAACP came to me and with evidence and a report alleging systematic discrimination within the Loudoun County Public School System in terms of its admissions to the academies of Loudoun, but also really stretching back into school discipline and the pullout programs for academic pullout programs going way back to the early grades. I saw that and I said, we've got to look at this, we've got to investigate it. And you know, as someone who does investigations, you don't assume anything, but there were concerning allegations, and I thought it was important to take you know, an independent look. And the determination came out. It was made public by the parties, so it's out in public. And I think when people look at that, it's an illustration of how much work we have in front of us. And I'm hopeful that we will be able to get some solid commitments from the public school system to address it and to rectify it. And I think it sends a message to other school systems that someone's watching and we're going to hold them accountable to.
Yeah, and I love your approach to that as far as the parties then being able to come together in partnership and you know, solve it and resolve it, because honestly, especially when it comes to education, that's everyone's investment. I don't care if you have kids or you don't have kids. That's your employment base. That's, you know, your doctors, your lawyers, everybody else, they're going to come through the system. So if we can make education accessible and available to them, then we all win, you know. So I think that's a huge investment in our Loudoun County public school system to say, you're exactly right, let's revisit this. And it's not about blame. It really is about opportunity. You've brought it to my attention. How do I resolve it? So it's not a matter of shaming me in a corner and saying you are this horrible school system, you've done X, Y, Z, but saying, let's figure this out and what impact have we had? So I love that approach that we are always trying to look at what is the community solution for us to be able to bring these challenges to the forefront and embrace them. You know,
but first we have to get the facts out.
Definitely. That's always the case, lawyer man. That's exactly right. What we have to be able to do is to establish it, because it's hard sometimes to believe when somebody's accusing you of something that, you know, because we have this implicit bias. You know, on the front, I may not identify that I have that bias, but if you keep bringing in the data and you show it to me, at least I have to now listen to it and say, you know what, I may have to change my lens because you're exactly right. So no, I appreciate all of those acts and efforts that you and your office have made to really improve our community. I don't know what I committed or what we committed to you as far as how long we would hold you hostage in this conversation. I think that we may have extended greater the hour than the half that we may have said, but I do really appreciate the fact that you joined us. We're very appreciative of really all the work that you've done, setting aside the conversation. Honestly, Mark, and I hope you don't find it disrespectful, I'm calling you by your first name, because I can definitely do Attorney General Herring on any day. It's never.
I'll always be little old Mark Herring.
I don't know if I'd ever call you little old, but I may call you Mark Herring. But really, you have taken our communities and you have moved us forward. And we do, you're right, we have a long way to go, but with you in leadership, we're moving in the right direction. And I want to thank you very much for having done that. So thank you for your time and thank you for your leadership.
Well, thank you for your leadership, Buta. You've been doing a great job as Commonwealth's attorney. I'm really glad to have the chance to have this conversation. As I said in the beginning, you know, we all would like to be able to get together in person again, and soon that will happen when it is safe. But it's awfully nice to stay connected and stay informed using whatever mechanisms we can. And this is really nice of you to invite me.
No, my pleasure. And you will always have the honor of having been the first.
For better or for worse. So
always for better.
hope it sets a good precedent for people.
I think you definitely have. I hope the others who we're going to challenge will rise to your level. And if not, then we're just going to kick them off and won't invite them back. But we're good. But thank you very much again for your time. Have a great evening.
Thank you. You too. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye. How cool is that?
So good.
That was
Right?
good.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing because you read about all the stuff that he's done. And then when he speaks about it, he really is very humble,
Yes.
you know? And I love what he said is that the attorney general should be the people's lawyer. I was like, yay.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
really that's what you want, is you want to feel as a community that somebody does represent you when something is not right. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty awesome. So how do people sign up for the show, Nick?
So they go to thetwithbuta.com and they press contact. And there is a great button to say suggest a topic or guest. And you can go ahead and you can, if you want to suggest yourself, by all means do it. You want to suggest someone in your community or in your network that you think would be a great guest. It goes right to us and we talk about it and we'll get in touch with them.
That's pretty cool. Now, if they wanted to kind of sign up to watch it or to get alerts as to when our next show is, how does that work out?
So they can either go to thetwithbuta.com and right on the homepage is a sign up for updates form. And you can put in your name and your email address and we'll send you emails about, news, about new guests and other fun things. Or you can follow us on pretty much every social media platform ever invented, with the exception of MySpace. It's all at the Tea with Buta. If it's Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, you're everywhere, and they can find you on the platform of their choice.
Now, Nick, I think you're throwing a little bit of shade on that MySpace because you probably know that I still have an AOL account, but we're going to have a conversation another day about that.
Slowly but surely, we're working you into the future.
There you go. That works perfectly well. Krysta, let's talk about who some of our future guests are going to be.
Well, I, as you previously alluded to, am really excited about this, or really interested in this idea about how different people are handling COVID and all of the different stresses that brought and challenges. So we're definitely going to have some people talking about education in COVID and the struggles that has brought, parents, teachers, school board member. We are also looking at the mental health aspects of COVID, just really looking about how we can all have hope moving forward in this difficult time.
Yeah. All right, wrap us up, Krysta.
So thank you all for joining us to hear our guest this afternoon, this morning, for listening to our conversation, because as you've heard so many times throughout this conversation, community is very important to us. And that is really what we're striving. We're striving to build community. We're striving to empower. We're striving to make our society better in general. And we know that you can help us do that.
As always, I'm very appreciative of you guys and the rest of our team members, Priscilla and Lisa. Next time around, we'll give them a little bit of FaceTime, but we'll figure out how we're going to let them join us. But they literally are the backbone of our ability to be able to put this on. So to each of our viewers and the listeners, thank you very much for allowing us to have this as our first show. And we are very much looking forward to being able to entertain you, but more importantly, give you hope each week. And so follow us on Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. Thank you very much. Have a great day.